Over the course of history, borders, imaginary lines drawn on maps by people and their governments, have given rise to conflict, inspired pride, divided cultures, languages, and people. They have changed the lives that we live depending on which side of the line that we are born on or call home. The United States is no stranger to the oddities of these ever-changing lines. As America expanded westward, states became bigger, blockier, and boringer due to the lack of population and the incorporation of territories as states. The eastern part of the U.S. is much more diverse in borderlines, as America was discovering itself while drawing many of them. For now, though, we'll head north. Canada is often referred to by Americans jokingly as America's hat. However, it doesn't just sit on top of the US like it would seem in crude drawings of North America. Let's not forget Alaska, which sits north of a large majority of Canada, and a dip in the Canadian southern border that jets down into the middle of the US mainland. It's this downward spike in the border that causes some interesting border facts that we often overlook when thinking about Canada. For example, the southern tip of Canada is actually further south than the northern border of California, meaning that the occupants of this northern portion of California live further north than the residents of Pelee Island in Ontario, Canada. Another oddity with this dip is that although you may be a resident of the deep south states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas, if you live in the northern portion of these states, you're actually closer to Canada than you are to your neighbors to the south. But the oddities with the Canada-US border don't end there. Another example of this strange division is Point Roberts in Washington state. Point Roberts is a portion of Washington that is completely separated from not just Washington, but the entire United States. It is, however, connected to the Canadian landmass. Its existence is a result of nothing more than literally being forgotten about when this line, the 49th parallel, was agreed to be the northern border of the United States in this region. There is no bridge or even ferry to the mainland. Instead, the roughly 1,300 residents of this area must drive through the Canadian border, then drive 25 miles through Canada and back through the US border in order to complete simple journeys like taking their kids to school. The last oddity in our US-Canada suite, I promise, comes to us from an area between northern Vermont and southern Quebec. This street, Rue Canusa, sits directly on top of the US-Canada border for about a quarter of a mile, which means that while houses on this side of the street are in the USA, the houses on the other side are in Canada. The towns of Stansted, Quebec, and Derby Line, Vermont host this odd border section, with residents straddling the border in their everyday lives. Residents say that crossing from one side of town to the other involves a couple-minute stop at a border station for a quick document check. And areas intersected by the line, like the library, some businesses, and even some homes, are subject to a degree of leniency when visiting. Just like how drawing straight, absolute lines can cause issues, so can basing borders on ever-changing waterways, such as rivers. Rivers move water, water moves dirt, dirt is land, and land is what we're trying to divide with borders. So it goes without saying that over the past, since these lines have been determined, things have changed. Take this small section of the Mississippi River, between Mississippi and Louisiana. This is the river as it runs today. And here is the border between these states drawn by where the river was when the border was established. Because this river has changed course so much since the drawing of these lines, we now have a bunch of little exclaves that sit along its banks. Mississippi has roughly 11 exclaves on the Louisiana side of the river, while Louisiana has about 8 on the Mississippi side. Mississippi also has about 14 exclaves on the banks of the Arkansas side of the river, while Arkansas has about 15 on the Mississippi side. The trend continues through Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So if you were traveling down the Mississippi River and paddled up to one of its banks, it wouldn't be as easy as you'd think to know exactly which state you were actually in. One of the most notable oddities along the Mississippi is the Kentucky Bend. This anomaly was not created so much by the river changing itself, but was in fact created by a mistake that was made while surveying the southern border of Kentucky and then later moving the border east to the Mississippi River. The result is a portion of Kentucky that is surrounded by two other states, Tennessee and Missouri, and in no way touches the rest of Kentucky. In fact, the only way to get to the rest of Kentucky from here is to drive 15 miles through Tennessee or swim across the mile-wide Mississippi twice. Another feature on the political map that Americans seem to love is the Panhandle. We love panhandles so much that currently 9 states officially support these odd strips of land. And a couple others just refuse to identify theirs as such. Panhandles are usually a result of compromise. One of the most notable panhandles in the states juts off of Oklahoma, because it actually looks like a pan with a handle. Oklahoma's panhandle was born because Texas, which looked like this at the time, decided that slavery was so important to them that when Congress outlawed any slavery above the latitude of 3630, they decided they would part with all the land north of that, giving up a sizable chunk of their own panhandle. Included in this compromise of 1850 was Texas giving up this portion to make room for New Mexico, giving Texas a new panhandle, and leaving an area left behind known as no man's land. And once Oklahoma came around, the land was snatched up by the Sooner State, and it remains one of the strangest looking features on the U.S. map today. Pennsylvania's border includes what many would consider a panhandle, but locals like to refer to it as a tab or chimney, perhaps to avoid the connotations associated with the other term. Technically, historically, it's called the Erie Triangle. Pennsylvania's panhandle, triangle, was formed when neither New York nor Pennsylvania's charters included the small strip of land on the shore of Lake Erie. Both states petitioned for the land to be added to theirs, as well as Connecticut and Massachusetts because why not? New York already had abundant access to not only the Great Lakes, but also the Atlantic Ocean. Connecticut and Massachusetts weren't really taken seriously, and Pennsylvania, for the most part, was landlocked at the time. So the land was awarded to Pennsylvania at the cost of 75 cents an acre. Speaking of Connecticut and Massachusetts, if you live in one of these states, or if you've looked really closely at the border between the two, you'll notice that it isn't quite as straight as it's supposed to or seems to be. You'll notice this little chip or bulge or jog, as it's referred to as. You'll find that many strange borders in the U.S. are a result of either surveyor error or compromise or a combination of the two, and this one is no exception. The Southwick jog was created when Massachusetts took it upon themselves to hire a couple of amateur surveyors to determine the southern portion of its designated border. Unfortunately, the surveyors took a unique approach to the job, and instead of walking and surveying as they went, they took a shortcut and sort of just guessed. The result is that the Massachusetts border ended up about 3 miles south of where it was supposed to be. Connecticut obliged until they sent out their own surveyors, professional ones, who determined that the line was placed wrong. By this time, the area of Southwick, where this notch is, was already established on the Massachusetts side and had a population. After some bickering, Massachusetts agreed to move the line up as long as it could hold on to the Southwick area. Shortly after Connecticut agreed to this, the residents petitioned to live by the line and join Connecticut, where taxes were lower. And as a result, Massachusetts and Connecticut split the area in half. An inconsistency further east in the Massachusetts border with Rhode Island stems from Massachusetts budging with Connecticut on the new official line drawn, but the border with Rhode Island stayed consistent with the original wrong line. It's not uncommon for states to share islands with each other, especially with many lines being drawn solely based on latitude and longitude. The division of a few islands for coastal states just sort of happens by default. What's interesting about Turtle Island, though, is that it's probably the ugliest and most useless island that's ever been disputed by two states for no particular reason. The facilities on Turtle Island were and have been forever operated by the city of Toledo. However, the city of Toledo has not always been in Ohio, where it is today. Many of you have heard of the Toledo Strip and the fight that happened over the land, but the short version is that Toledo used to be in Michigan, so the island was owned by Michigan. When Toledo was rezoned into Ohio, the city of Toledo still operated the island, but the island still technically remained in Michigan. The lighthouse ended up being decommissioned in 1904, and no one really cared about the island, until, for some reason, in 1973, the dispute was brought up again, and the Supreme Court determined to split the island right down the middle, giving half of it to Ohio and the other half to Michigan. And you have to wonder the number of tax dollars spent on this. Far north in the eastern portion of Alaska, the U.S. has a neighbor that a lot of Americans don't think about when considering countries they share borders with. And it just happens to be the other party in a long-lived, passive-aggressive, sometimes aggressive, relationship. That's right, Russia. The truth is that at its closest point, the United States and Russia are a lot closer than you think. From the mainland of Alaska to the Russian mainland, the distance is only 50 miles, meaning that if there were a bridge, you could drive to Russia in less than an hour. However, at their closest point, the United States and Russia are only less than 2.5 miles apart. The Diomedes, or Diomede Islands, are unique in that they are so close, but in two different countries. Little Diomede is in the United States, and Big Diomede is in Russia, meaning that yes, not only can you see Russia from the United States, but you could also walk there in about 20 minutes in the winter when the ocean is frozen over. Another peculiar thing about these islands is that they aren't just separated by a political border, but a time border as well. The international date line runs directly between the islands, meaning that Big Diomede Island in Russia is 21 hours ahead of Little Diomede in the US, inspiring the nicknames Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island. Lastly, we move back to the mainland, and the biggest state within the mainland, Texas. The oddity of Texas's border is that it's just so absolutely massive. With a border length of 3,359 miles, if you stretched out its border, it would reach from the west coast of the United States to the easternmost point in Canada. Another way to put this in perspective is that if you were on the eastern boundary of Texas, it would take you less time to drive to the Atlantic Ocean than it would to take to drive to the other side of Texas. And if you were on the western boundary of Texas, you could get to the Pacific Ocean quicker than you could get to the eastern part of Texas. It's a good thing that Texas has the country's highest average speed limit at 78.3 miles per hour, with some stretches of 85 miles per hour being the fastest speed limit in the country altogether. So that's just a few of the countless border oddities that occur in the United States. With so many more out there, I'm sure to do another video on the topic soon. Let me know what I missed or that you would like to see in another video. This is a new channel, so I plan on putting out a video about every 2 weeks, so don't forget to like and subscribe to see more. Thanks for watching.